0.08% of Africa's total landmass, and yet 15% of known plant species can be found here. For the first time ever, we can tell the story of a rum that is not just about sugarcane. And that felt so rich, so unexplored, that I was really, really excited to try and find a way to honor that kind of richness and uniqueness. I think the ballpark figure of how much I invested into the business hovers at somewhere between 40 million to 60 million francs.
Hello there. My guest this week on the Long Form podcast is Rohan Shah. Rohan, a Singaporean who has made Rwanda his home, is the founder of Imizi, Rwanda's first award-winning rum brand. We discuss his personal journey, why he chose Rwanda to open his liquor factory, and his ambition to create the first ever Rwandan multi-million-dollar local alcohol brand. Hello there. Before we dive into today's conversation, have you subscribed to our channel yet? If you haven't, do so. And remember to share your thoughts with us in the comments below and like this video. Your support means a lot. Now let's get into it. Rohan, welcome to the Long Form.
Thanks so much, Sanny. Great to be here.
So, first of all, this is not the first time we've met. I actually came to your factory just on the outskirts of Kigali. It was quite a surprising little factory because I had known of your brand, but I did not actually know how it was made. And I was surprised because from such a small space, you're able to create so much. And I was really fascinated, and I was like, okay, I need to have Rohan on the podcast because there's so much more to the story than just this. So first of all, thank you so much for finding the time. I know today we're actually recording on a public holiday. So I appreciate the fact that, you've come to sit with me today.
It's such a pleasure, Sanny. No, thank you for your time and finding us interesting enough to want to find out more. More than happy to share our stories. So glad that you're an interested interlocutor.
Yeah. So before we talk about the liquor business, can you explain how a young Singaporean, a Harvard social sciences graduate, ends up in Rwanda in the first place? I mean, the world, when you think about being a Harvard graduate, right? That's like top of the top to the top, right? The world is your oyster, right? You can walk anywhere and say, hey, these are my credentials, let's talk. But you chose Rwanda. What in your background, what in your childhood made you make that decision to say, you know what, I'm going to go so off the beaten path that some people from maybe back home or some of the people from my graduating class might not recognize the person I am today?
That's a really good question. I think from the outside, it would certainly look like this is off the beaten path or a strange pivot. But for me, this has felt decades in the making. Like you said, there are core experiences as a child that really inform what I ended up doing and why I'm here. The things that I would draw your attention to, and these core experiences are, first of all, growing up in Southeast Asia, right, and being the son of Indian migrants to Singapore. What Singapore people don't think about as a developing country, right? It is super, super wealthy, but it shares something in common with the rest of the region, which is a history of exploitation and colonial conquest, right? And that has left many parts of the world worse for wear. East Africa, Central Africa, and Rwanda is no stranger to that story. And so, learning the history of my country traveling back to India to visit my extended family, you become sensitized to the fact that even though I was growing up comfortable with a lot of privilege, there are lots of people that do not get access to the same opportunities, which is and that became something I became deeply interested in. How do we create opportunities for people everywhere? So when I went to Harvard, I studied international development through the lens of social sciences. I studied economics, and specifically the economics of development, right? Which is something, and that work brought me to sub-Saharan Africa, because there were many interesting dynamic projects happening on this part of the continent. The first time I came to sub-Saharan Africa for work was to rural Mozambique, where I was living about 120 kilometers from the closest supermarket and 30 kilometers from the closest paved road. And the first time I came to Rwanda was in 2019, where I was, for a brief period of time, working on an agricultural project with a few coffee cooperatives just outside Huye. And that was, I think, a really foundational experience, because 3 years later, I decided to move full-time to Rwanda.
How old are you?
I am 29.
29, and how did your parents take the news that you were getting that extremely expensive education and bringing it here?
Well, I mean, first of all, one thing that I was really grateful for was the fact that Harvard was really supportive of my education. So the university paid for 50% of my education. So I think it really bolstered us financially. But I think, to be honest, one of the things I'm really grateful for is my parents, having witnessed so many different parts of my journey, right, being really supportive of this endeavor. I remember my first time to working in a development context was in Mozambique in 2016. But before that, I remember in 2014, after I finished serving in the Singaporean military, I said to my parents, I've saved up some money, I would like to visit Iran. And then they said no, and we had a huge argument. And so then it became, okay, fine, I'm not going to Iran, I'll go to Bosnia instead. So I think they've now had decades of me pushing them. And so when it came a few years ago, when I told them for the first time, I'm going to leave my job, my full-time job, and I'm going to work on building a distillery. Back then I wasn't sure it was going to be in Rwanda, but I said to them, might be in Rwanda. I think it was a long time coming.
Was that always your dream? Okay, so first of all, you left a full-time job. So what was the job in?
I used to work with an organization that delivered agricultural advice by SMS. Our projects ranged from various parts of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and then in East Africa, projects in Rwanda, like I mentioned, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, in Southern Africa and Zambia.
Where was that job based?
So we had teams sort of everywhere, right?
Where were you based?
I was in Boston, and then I would travel to various parts of the world to support field work and collect data, and then go back to Boston. Of course, COVID completely changed that and made travel impossible. I found myself back home in Singapore during COVID, and so I continued to work that job remotely, which was very difficult.
And did you enjoy that job?
I did, and I think it was a really critical part of what informed building this company. Because I'm a city boy, right? Singapore is a city. My parents grew up in Mumbai, and so visiting India meant visiting Mumbai. These are huge megapolises, right? Giant cities. And I find cities so dynamic, but as a consequence, I never met a farmer, right, before I was in my 20s. I didn't know anything about agriculture, and I didn't know anything about how important, or I maybe underestimated the importance of the rural portion of development. And traveling to various parts of the world, talking to farmers with the help of a translator, of course, unless I spoke the local language as in India, really sensitized me to what a what a tremendous opportunity and challenge rural development is. In an age of climate change, the people who are experiencing the challenges first and foremost in every part of the world are farmers.
So you leave that job that it seemed that you were quite passionate about to go on the alcohol journey.
Yeah.
It's quite a shift. Although you do say that there is a certain correlation between that job and obviously the agricultural side of alcohol is also there, but it does seem like quite a jump.
Yes and no, right? Whilst I was working this development job, right, while my weekends were filled with working as a bartender. So I would clock out on Fridays, and on Friday night, Saturday, sometimes Sunday, I would be bartending. For me, bartending is an experience of creating hospitality, opening up a space to people and inviting them to join and participate. But also there's something remarkable about alcohol, which is it is a vehicle for flavor, for storytelling, and for connection to place. Like you said, that there is this deep connection between alcohol and agriculture, but for me, it's so much deeper than that. The first time I came to Rwanda, when we were traveling, we would see signs everywhere of saying banana beer, banana wine here, right? And that was the first time that I started to think seriously about these ingredients, right? I was buying bottles for bartending, but then I realized somebody has to be fermenting this. Somebody has to be distilling this. And it was in Rwanda when I first realized that those people were farmers. So when we think about every distilling tradition that is deep, rich, and well-respected, whether it's cognac in France, whether it's mezcal and tequila in Mexico, whether it's Scotch in Scotland, every one of those traditions, if you look back several hundred years, is first a farming tradition. So it didn't feel like a pivot to me. To me, it felt obvious both in terms of the things I was passionate about and the work that I wanted to do.
You're pouring your heart, and it seems like when I hear you speak, there's a lot of heart in it. There's a lot of passion, and it's being manifested in this business that you're trying to build. So let's talk about that. There are a lot of experts and people that we'd call smart people who say that you're risking your future because you're pouring not just your passion and heart, but you're also pouring your resources into this brand and building your business here. There's some who'd say that building your business here in Rwanda is a big risk. I mean, the fact of the matter is that 30 years ago, there was genocide in this country. Why have you, who could have taken this anywhere in the world, why have you bet on Rwanda? What gives you such confidence in its long-term future?
I've been, like I said, I've been an external observer of Rwanda's sort of miracle story for a long time now. And it's, you can't ignore the horrific legacy of 1994 and everything that happened before that. But it's, every time I've been here, and every person I talk to is so invested in telling a new kind of story about Rwanda. You can't help but be inspired by that, right? I also have profound faith in every business is risky, and there are so many challenges in running a business, not just in Rwanda, but anywhere in the world, right? I think my sort of, I'm pretty young and new to the entrepreneurship game, but my intuition has been you have to pick the risks that you're comfortable with and pick the challenges you want to take on. And I feel a lot more comfortable picking the challenges in Rwanda. You're referring to, you talk about risks, but some of the risks I feel insulated from here are governance risks, right? It is remarkable how collaborative, how pro-development institutions are here, people who work in these institutions are. When we think about alcohol and the alcohol industry specifically, BACARDI is today based in Puerto Rico, right? It is one of the biggest rum brands in the world. It is a large alcohol group, but BACARDI was first had to flee nationalization and expropriation in Cuba when Castro's regime took over. Those are not the sorts of challenges I envision in a place like Rwanda, because in every experience so far, what I've seen is there's a genuine desire for collaboration and inviting foreign experts or foreign dreamers like myself to build.
So let's talk about your entry into the artisanal alcohol business. First of all, why this particular sector of the alcohol business? Because it's a sector within a sector. Why rum?
Yeah.
And why rum from Rwanda?
Yeah. Great questions. So first of all, why rum? I think of this as a sort of Venn diagram, right? There is a sweet spot between the market research, right? To me, so as a challenger brand, as a brand that wants to grow, one of the things we think about is what is 6 years from now, 10 years from now, going to be the next spirit, right? The next global spirit. Because if we're chasing trends for today, 10 years from now, those trends might be completely different. So we need to sort of read the tea leaves or try and read into the future. It's anyone's guess, but my best guess is that rum is going to be a critical part of where premium spirit drinkers go next. There are some encouraging statistics that suggest this. So for example, rum as a category is growing roughly 6% at 6% CAGR. And
what does that mean?
Compound annual growth rate, which basically means that it's basically a measure of year on year, how is it growing, right? And what's also interesting is that rum is growing faster by value than it is by volume, which means people are drinking better rum. So that's the market analysis, researchy stuff. But then there's also, we are building a physical business, a brick and mortar business in a place. And one of the really important things to me was to start with what is grown here, right, that we can use.
So what is grown here, there's a ton of bananas. So very often what I have seen is like banana spirits. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But never rum.
Yeah. So rum is always made from sugarcane or sugarcane derivatives. And one of the things that I was cognizant of is that I wasn't fully comfortable using a food crop.
Wow.
Rwanda is still a net importer of food. And as it chases food security, which is a really, really important important issue, as small as my business is, I don't necessarily want to feel like I am taking away from feeding a household,
Taking food away from the mouths that want to feed themselves.
Yeah, exactly, right? And sugarcane is not a essential part of anyone's diet. But there is a lot grown here that is underexploited. There is a single sugar mill in the entire country. There are parts of the country where sugarcane is grown that the sugar mill does not purchase from. And so we have an opportunity to add value here without, compromising on food security or anyone else's household safety. So that was the other thing, right? There's sugarcane grown here that is underexploited and we can do something cool with. But the last thing is, I think, this is at the end of the day a creative project as well. We are making something from scratch. And Rwanda is really, really unusual and special when we think about sugarcane producing places.
Wow.
So sugarcane is very water hungry, right? And is typically cultivated in plantation scale, right? So if you go to any other rum producing part of the world, like Mauritius or the Caribbean, you will just see sugarcane fields as far as the eye can see. Rwanda is kind of special where sugarcane only grows in the valleys, right? Or places where there is a lot of water. And because of how interested the government and society has been in reforestation, habitat protection, and protecting biodiversity, Rwanda still has a lot of rainforest, a lot of alpine forest to Afromontane forest. So what this means is that Rwanda is one of the most biodiverse parts of sub-Saharan Africa. If I recall correctly, it's something like 0.08% of Africa's total landmass, and yet 15% of known plant species can be found here. And so that felt like a really rich opportunity, right? Because for the first time ever, we can tell the story of a rum that is not just about sugarcane. If we bring the whole country into the picture, then this becomes a story about cane and the forest, right? Hills and valleys, field and forest. And that felt so rich, so unexplored, that I was really, really excited to try and find a way to honor that kind of richness and uniqueness.
And what about the artisanal part of it? Because you chose that path, right? You chose something that's different from anything that's ever created. Was that because you understood that you can go, for example, you can go against a BACARDI that's just producing like hundreds of thousands of liters of a drink, versus you who's like saying, okay, I might not be able to produce in mass quantities, but I can produce something that's just from here?
Yeah, totally. I think it's both a question of business savvy and also a question of personal passion, right? In terms of business savvy, you're right. Rwanda is several hundred years behind the Caribbean, right, and other parts of the world that have been distilling rum for a really long time. So it seems like a really hard proposition to compete on a volume game. You're right. BACARDI makes millions of bottles every year. It's that sort of scale is really, really hard to beat. But even if we think about on a more customer to customer, account to account level, right? Let's say I were to bring this bottle to a bar in Lagos or a bar in Shanghai, right? They will already have several rum bottles on their back bar, and they will already have several rum bottles that they use at cocktails. I am trying to nudge myself into a crowded space. So in order to make it worth their while, I have to offer a vision of rum that is so different and so exciting that they really want to include it, right? And almost create a space for ourselves. And that's why we've gone for this hyper unique approach. And that's also why we're trying to compete not on volume, but on unique selling point and the uniqueness of the offering. And then secondly, I would also say, sorry to interrupt, but I would also say, what is the point? To me, it doesn't seem like there is much point to us trying to replicate something that already exists, right? Nothing in Rwanda's history or new history already exists, right? There is no template for how a country rebuilds and creates this completely new vision of itself. Maybe there are a couple of analogs, but what Rwanda is doing is entirely unique too. So shouldn't a product from a place that is completely different also taste completely different? I'm not interested in saying we're just as good as Caribbean rum and we're made in Rwanda. I want to start from the premise of what is special here and then build from there.
So you've mentioned something about this rum being special. I mean, to stand out from all the thousands of small specialty rum brands, you need a special hook. It's not just that, oh, this is a rum brand made from Rwanda. It needs something else.
Yeah.
And so let me ask you the question. What makes Imizi different from any other brand in the world?
Imizi is unique because it is a cane juice rum infused with 6 botanicals sourced from Central Africa, half of which are indigenous to Rwanda.
Okay, let's break that down. First, cane juice rum. What does that mean?
So rum is legally defined as a spirit that is made from sugarcane or its derivatives. 98% of the world's rum will be made from molasses, which is a waste product from sugar refining. Only 2% of the world's rum is made from fresh cane juice. Because it's more expensive, you have to work with farmers. So Imizi is one of those 2%.
And why is cane juice special?
The flavor is very, very different. If you try most molasses-based rums, they're fantastic. Some of them are really, really delicious, but the primary note is of sugar, right? Crystallized sugar, refined sugar, because of the source material. Cane juice rums have a lot more of a green, grassy quality. It's the difference between eating a spoonful of sugar and drinking fresh sugarcane juice.
So let's look about, okay, the average person is not able to make sense of what you just said, but maybe they'll make sense of it based off of the brands they know. So Captain Morgan.
It's a molasses-based rum.
Okay. BACARDI.
Molasses-based.
Okay. What's a well-known brand that uses cane juice?
So some of the rums from Martinique, all of the rums from Martinique, if they are labeled Rum Agricole in French, will be made from cane juice. Certain Haitian rums, Haitian rum is called Clarin. Many Clarins will be made from fermented cane juice.
And so are the cane juice rums, on the whole, more expensive than the molasses-based rums?
In general, yes. Some of the reason is the cost of the raw material. And you have to have proximity of the distillery to the sugarcane fields. You have to follow an agricultural season. Molasses are shelf stable. You can make rum throughout the year. So in general, cane juice rums are more expensive.
Okay. Why did you choose to use cane juice rum over molasses-based rum?
It goes back to the very first thing we talked about, right? I wanted to work directly with farmers. I think the estimate given to me by the district was that there are...
Which district?
Gatenye, was that there are 15 tons of sugarcane is harvested every week.
In Gatenye.
Yeah. And, I want to buy directly from farmers and pay them a good price.
So you don't actually, okay. So you actually go to Gatenye and buy your sugarcane.
It used to be me personally a year ago, but now it's somebody from my team.
And how much sugarcane are you buying from these farmers, and at what price?
So we purchase roughly 1.2 tons of sugarcane every month, and we pay 125 francs per kilogram of sugarcane. For reference, that's about 3 to 5 times the commodity price of sugarcane.
Okay. Now let's talk about the other things that you said, which were about the botanicals and having, the botanicals, and the majority of those botanicals can only be found in this region, and some might be indigenous to Rwanda. Yeah. First of all, what are botanicals?
Botanicals are material that comes from plants. Botanicals can also be thought of as another word for herbs, right? So ginger is a botanical, umuravumba is a botanical, tea is a botanical.
Okay, so when you talk about botanicals that could only be found in this region, What do you mean?
So plants, like people, have traveled around the world, right? But historians of plants, botanists, are able to say what is, through genetic analysis and things like that, what started here, what evolved here first and then spread outwards. And sometimes things surprise us, right? So avocados are grown everywhere across Rwanda and in many other parts of the world, but are obviously not indigenous to Rwanda. Rosemary, you will find in many parts of Rwanda, but it's not from here. It was brought by other people, right? Sometimes herbs also just travel by themselves over time through wind and through breeding further and further away. But some herbs that we use in our formulation really are from this part of the world first and foremost.
Are those herbs from this region, are they only found here, or are they only found, like when I mean here, I mean in Rwanda, or are they found in maybe Rwanda, DRC, Burundi, and
in general, I would say that they are endemic or indigenous to Central or Eastern Africa. One thing I would say though is sometimes you find these remarkable variations in flavor, and that there is nothing even within the same species. So a good example is umnyenya, right? That I know that herb as tulsi, or holy basil. We see it in Southeast Asia, we see it in South Asia. It is used medicinally. I'm very, very familiar with it. All right, it is the same species here as it is back in Southeast Asia. And yet, when I go to certain traditional healers here and I see the umnyenya and I crush it, it smells completely different, right? And there's no explanation for this except for the rich natural variation that occurs in nature.
I guess it's kind of like coffee, right? So you'll have Arabica coffee, but something about the Rwandan, I guess, elevation, distance from the equator, and the soils will make that coffee taste different.
Yeah, absolutely. The word in French for this is terroir. I don't speak French. I probably mangled that. But terroir means basically terrain. And it is used frequently in winemaking to describe all of the millions of things that are acting on how a grape is finally expressed in flavor, right? So the same grape grown in one part of France will taste very different if it's grown in another part of France. And that cumulative effect shows up in flavor. And it's the same thing with both sugarcane and the herbs that we use.
So let's talk about, because you can have sugarcane over here, you can have herbs over here, but then there has to be a process that brings everything together to then create a product that makes sense, that tastes good and makes sense. Take us through, because it almost sounds like mad science, right? There's a certain amount of this, a certain amount of that, you put a little smidgen of this, a little smidgen of that, and then it creates something.
Yeah.
How in the world did you create this?
You're right. It is a little bit like mad science. There is a methodology to developing recipes.
And where did you learn it from?
So some of this, I think, is from bartending, right? Putting together a new cocktail recipe is a similar combination of flavors. What is working? What do you need? Do you need more acidity? Do you need more herbaceousness? So some of that mindset of many micro tweaks to create the effect you want on the tongue and the nose is from that experience. Some of it is just from growing up around lots of very good food and being around people who are passionate about food and wanted to talk about what is working, what is not working, how would this be better, how would this be worse. And so you combine all of those experiences and you bring it to a new library of flavors in this part of the world. So like you said, there is a certain process, right? But some of it is serendipity, some of it is chance, some of it is just effort and doing hundreds of different combinations. What I did was I started with I don't know if this is how everybody develops a new spirit or a new product, but what I did was I developed a flavor library, which means that I distilled dozens of different herbs and ingredients, and then you've got your sort of palette of colors that you can paint with. And then you start combining, and some of it is initially just guesswork, right? Oh, I like this flavor, maybe this will go with this, right? And after that, you try that first. Is it working? Is it not working? Does it need to be adjusted? And then you try a bunch of things over and over again. So it's constant permutations. It's constant drinking more water so you don't accidentally get drunk. It is constant resetting your palate until you arrive at what I would say is like the 80 to 90% of where you think this is going to go. And then you start to bring other voices in. You start to collect feedback from people. You start to mess around with the remaining like 5% of the formulation. Maybe there's another herb that you can add. Maybe we can add some distilled green tea. Oh, that's not really working, or it's becoming too muted. So maybe we take that out, until you have a recipe that is the recipe.
How long does that process take? Because it seems quite detailed and it sounds long.
I think so. Before the whole process, before we even started looking at renting space to renovate and build into a factory, I had been working on the business for about 10 months before that.
I mean, working on the recipe. So from the idea phase to you saying, you know what, this is what we're going to bottle. Yeah,
I would say that, looking back, I think about 10 or 11 months is an accurate reflection, right? Because I only started working on the lease and the technicalities of putting together a production facility once I felt like we had arrived at pretty much the recipe. Though having said that, before our first full production run, I had this one idea in my head, and I thought we were close enough. I don't really need to explore it, but I'm glad I did, because it took another 3 or 4 weeks of tweaks and adjustments, and it was inconvenient to include a 6th botanical. It used to be 5, but that 6th botanical eventually really worked. So it was 10 months, but if you think about including that last moment of inspiration, 18.
And obviously you had left your job, right? So you're in Rwanda, you are just testing out. You have to live. You have to get transport, you need to buy sugarcane. Yeah. There's a bunch of money that you need to be able to survive those X amount of months.
Yeah.
Do you remember how much it cost?
I think, I don't remember how much it cost, because you just keep on spending and spending and spending. Everything was from what I had saved over my time outside of Rwanda. And if I did extra work, right, that money would go back into the business. I think the ballpark figure, I would have to look at our financial reports from our first 2 years of operating, but I think the ballpark figure of how much I invested into the business hovers at somewhere between 40 million to 60 million francs.
60 million francs. So, and there's a reason why I'm asking those figures, because sometimes people have a dream, right? And they have a really, really good idea. Like you had an idea. But sometimes you think, this idea is impossible. I could not possibly pull it off. What gave you the confidence to, one, put the money aside, then spend that money that you'd put aside, and know that, you know what, at the end of the day, it will be all worth it?
You don't know it's going to be all worth it, right? And so I think one thing that is, there's so much glorification of entrepreneurship today, and I think one thing that is not talked enough about is the fact that entrepreneurship is not this noble pursuit of self-sacrifice. There is tons of self-sacrifice involved, but we have to acknowledge that not everybody is going to have 60 million francs to be able to spend on a business, right? I am lucky that I had access to those opportunities, that I had access to the education that created more opportunities for me to be able to save that money and eventually put it in, right? Having said that, well, the other thing to think about is so that is completely true. I am lucky in ways that other people might not be. But the other thing that I want to mention is typically people will say, if you want to start a distillery and have it be a viable business, don't bother until you have $1.2 million, right? So we made $60,000 work for us, right? Which is 5% of what typically people say that you need. And so I hope that there are two messages that can come through and that people don't think of this as being in contradiction to one another. One, first of all, there is luck, there is privilege, and and some amount of basic stability, security. I can always fall back on my degree. If nothing works out, right, I will have lost a few years and lost $16,000, but I can maybe do something else and feed myself, right? So there is all of that. There is luck, there is privilege, and there's the safety network. But then the other thing is there is also a certain amount of just savvy risk management and starting really small, starting at 5% of the startup capital that people say you need, right? Just to validate your hypothesis, just to get things going. Also, for us, at least so far, has kind of worked.
So, but that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, what you're saying makes sense, but also doesn't make sense because you've said that that the experts say without about $1 million, don't even waste your time.
Yeah.
But you wasted your time.
Yeah.
Quote unquote. What did you do differently to make it work and to kind of prove the naysayers wrong?
So some of the things that I did differently are adopting a really, really lean approach to manufacturing. So for instance, one example would be something like, let me just give you one example from our production process, right? We process every 2 weeks or so, we process about 400 liters of sugarcane juice, right? And turn that into a low spirit that is redistilled. So we need about 400 to 500 liters of fermentation. The typical size of a fermenter is 500 liters. You can get up to 2,000, you can get much larger, but the smallest size that a craft distillery will typically look at is 500 liters, right? So we had an option. We could purchase a 500 liter fermenter, right? But then the challenge would be, how do we then regulate temperature? Fermentation generates heat. It can heat up your entire fermentation. The yeast stresses out and dies or creates off flavors. So what you then need is a jacket that is going to circulate coolant or water to maintain the temperature at a temperature that is not stressful for the yeast. That is a lot more expensive. So should I look into purchasing a 500 liter fermentation tank that you can find within Rwanda that is not jacketed, compromising quality? Should I look into importing a 500 liter jacketed tank that will preserve quality but will increase my costs because I will now have to think about shipping, I will now have to think about shipping less than a container, and all of those costs will add up? Or can I think like scrappily and lean? And what I realized is instead of one 500 liter tank, what we can do instead is we can have many small 50 liter tanks, right? At that size, it's small enough, that tank is small enough that it can radiate its temperature out, heat out into the air, and keep a cool, even, stable temperature. Incidentally, this is how the oldest fermentations used to happen, right? At some of the very traditional mezcal distilleries and tequila distilleries in Mexico, they still use small fermentation tanks, right? So that sort of just small thinking out the box allowed us to get ourselves started just by working really, 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 really lean and sort of innovating, making do with less, right? Like making more from less.
And obviously, I came to visit you at your plant, and one of the things I also noticed was that you, instead of getting your own space, you got a shared space. And I guess it kind of like feeds into what you just said, right? It's like thinking scrappily and thinking outside the box and trying to cut costs as much as you can without compromising quality.
Quality or safety, right? So, but you're 100% right. I get sometimes embarrassed. Maybe sometimes I get embarrassed, right, at the size of our facility or the fact that it is not the distillery of my dreams, right? There are so many things that I wish we could do that we wish that we had. But at the same time, I think it's a little bit of vanity and pride to think that to be a businessman, you have to have a giant space, and that's what efficiency and profit looks like. Something that's impressive. Our space is very modest. Our distillery is very modest, but we abide scrupulously to the local regulations around food safety, and we submit all of our, we've passed every quality metric, and that's because we focus on doing what we need to do and within the means that we have.
Let's talk about the name, Imizi. When, for Kinyarwanda speakers like myself, Imizi means roots. For those who probably do not speak Kinyarwanda, it sounds like gibberish. Why didn't you give it a name that maybe was a bit more Western sounding, because I can imagine you trying to sell a product, going to a bar or in Helsinki and saying, I have Imizi. And them saying it wrong, right? Like it's just hard for them to say it. I'd like to have a better understanding of one, where the name came from, why you chose it, and why didn't you choose, a name that would roll comfortably off a Western tongue.
Yeah, names have profound power, right? Names of people, names of things, and for me, it's a great signal of how of the respect we accord to something, how much care you put on naming something and saying the name correctly. There are so many parts of the world. I have been in so many different conversations where people use correcting the name as a signal of social capital or cultural capital. Oh, no. That's not how you say that. It's actually this, right? But why don't we assign names from the global south, names from sub-Saharan Africa, names from the part of the world that I'm from, with the same amount of respect, right? So let's start from there, right? If names are important everywhere, and Rwandan names should be accorded with just as much respect as the names of, distilleries named after lakes in Scotland, right? We all learn how to say those names. We all learn how to say Lagavulin, right? So shouldn't people learn how to say Imizi? So that was the first principle. As to why Imizi and how the name came about, I don't speak Kinyarwanda very well. I speak very, very little. It's a very hard language, and I wish I'm trying to get better at it, but I just don't have that cultural capacity. I'm not from here. But what I did was I put a bunch of my friends who are Kinyarwanda speakers in a room, and I tried to describe to them my vision for this brand, what it signified to me, what our backstory was, and I said to them, I'll make you drinks after, but let's find a name for this first. And some of the names were horrible and very cliche, and I hadn't been in Rwanda very long, but I could tell that they were cliches as well. But some of the names, one of the names suggested by my friend Paul was Imizi, and it's perfect, right? It says everything that we want to say about the brand. Sugarcane is a crop where the roots stay in the ground for multiple seasons, right? So you cut and then you harvest and then it regrows, you cut and it regrows. And And some of that is actually good for the soil because less disruption to the roots and to soil structure is increasingly thought of as promoting of healthy soil systems. But then, so there's that component to it. The sugarcane stays rooted. But then the other component that is, for me, quite powerful is us harkening back to the traditional medicine and the herbs that are used, right? One of the traditional healer that I befriended, and who introduced me to some of the ingredients, said, when I asked him via a translator, why do you grow these herbs? The first thing that he said listed a couple of reasons, but the first thing he said was, "This is the knowledge of my parents and my grandparents," and that was tremendously inspiring, right? So the feeling that quite literally we are rooted in this place was an important message. And I think a name like Imizi really connotes that.
I mean, that's really cool. I'd like to. So I was scrolling through your social media, and I realized that in less than a year, you've been doing this for a year now, give or take. You've won 6 medals in internationally judged spirits competitions. First of all, 6 medals. Is it a big deal? Are you going up against, because there's a difference between, the local village games and the Olympic games, right? Because of the standards of competition. So these medals that you've won, are they Olympic level, or are we kind of thinking more Mudugudu games?
I mean, each competition has an application fee, and you have to ship the samples to where it's being judged on your own cost. So every competition we enter represents an investment. As you know, my pockets are not deep or infinite, so we really had to. So we prioritized competitions that, there are a lot of competitions that we really respect, but we prioritized, especially for our first season on the international judging panel, we really prioritized some of the competitions that I think of as super reputable.
So what are they?
So we were judged at the International Spirits Challenge, the International Wine and Spirits Competition, IWSC, the London Spirits Competition, and the Asia International Spirits Competition.
And so when you say you've won medals, what does that actually mean?
So it depends on the judging process with each competition. Sometimes a competition is judging a product holistically. So they are looking at a combination of the taste of the liquid, the packaging and branding, and the target retail price, right? And so some competitions are an assessment of how well will you do in that particular market. Will distributors, buyers, bars want to purchase this product is sometimes what they're assessing. Other competitions, they're assessing, it's just a blind tasting, right? The judging panel has no other information. They just have a unlabeled sample. They taste, they type their notes up, and then that is an evaluation of quality. But even sometimes the quality that they're assessing is not just how much they like it, but also conformity to style, because you apply within a certain category. So flavored rums are judged against other flavored rums, right? Or spiced rums are judged as a spiced rum. So candidly, I was kind of nervous about submitting to many of these competitions because, as we discussed, we're an unusual spirit, right? The thrill for me was doing something new, but without us there, without our marketing material to explain why we're doing something new, would a sample just read as kind of weird? Like, oh, I'm tasting it, I don't really get it. It doesn't really taste like most flavored rums. Therefore, I'm going to give it a low score, was my worry.
But I'm reading this, it says... the Global Spirits Master Silver from the Spirits Business.
Yeah, that's the last one I forgot to list. The one that's most impressive, maybe, the Global Rum and Cachaça Masters.
So why is this a big deal? And why silver, not say gold?
Um,
Like, is that a good thing? Like,
is silver a good thing?
yes.
I think so. I mean, silver is better than bronze, and silver is better than no medal. And most brands will get no medal, right?
Right.
So I think so. I'm obviously not content. I am Asian, and I am obsessed with excellence. And so I am looking forward to resubmitting in the future, and also submitting new products that we launch. We won't rest until we get a gold.
So, in this particular, for this particular awards where you got a silver, that's the Global Spirits Masters, what were they judging this spirit on?
If I recall correctly, I think the Global Spirit Masters are usually a blind tasting. So that's just on quality alone. How much do the judges like the flavor, the finish, the aroma?
How many other African brands did you go up against?
Good question. It is not made public how many brands enter, because I mean the thinking is if a brand doesn't win, right, you don't necessarily want to sabotage their entire business by saying this brand entered and did not win. So and brands and products also have the opportunity to after they receive a result say we would like for you to not publish it. So for example, if a brand was really shooting for a gold, right, but didn't get a gold, maybe they got a bronze or something, they can say we would like for you to not publish our bronze. So it's really hard to say how many brands we were assessed against, and specifically how many African brands were in the running.
Do you remember why they awarded you?
So with some of the brands, you get tasting notes on request. You will get the judges remarks. Yeah. And so with this one, I mean, in general, what I would say about tasting notes that we've received is it's always really interesting. We're here, we've smelt the smells, we've tasted the herbs, we know them, but you forget that these competitions are being judged in London, in Singapore, right? Places where, especially with some of the indigenous herbs, they have no frame of reference of what this is going to taste like. And so sometimes it's really interesting to see, I detect a sense at least, you can say that this is projection, or who really knows what is going behind a tasting note. But sometimes I get a sense that the tasting notes suggest that they're looking for anchors or reference, like, oh, this is like this is like that, and sometimes they're bang on the money. You're like, absolutely, there is a fennel note in the spirit, and sometimes you're like, oh, I would never have thought of that referent, but I understand in the context that you are, right, and what you're comparing to, I understand why you're making that reference. So,
6 awards in 1 year. What does this mean for your international ambitions?
So for us, I think it's just the start. I think it really is, it gives us our foot in the door. It doesn't roll out the red carpet, right? I've noticed at least a lot of deferring reactions to awards. So there are some markets in which if you talk to a distributor, they say, okay, great, how many awards do you have? Because in those markets, this is typically said of the US, right? In the US, they say that customers care about medals, and so distributors care about medals. If there isn't a sticker saying that you won this and this, then you're not going to have success on the shelf. But conversely, sometimes, when I bring bottles to bartenders at really cool cutting-edge bars and restaurants, or buyers, and I start listing how many medals, like, I almost think I'm doing us a disservice. I can see them rolling their eyes, right? Because in those contexts, I think the feeling is we're going to trust our palate first and foremost. We will decide, we don't care about your medals. We're going to decide based on whether we like it or not, right? So I think it really depends on the market. And also, finally, medals are not the the entry, like the guarantor of financial commercial success, right? We're still going to have to work on ensuring that we enter the market at the right price, that we're supported with the right amount of marketing spend, that we're building the right relationships with buyers and distributors, and that we're telling the story in the correct way, right? So there are so many things that are going to go into entering any foreign market. I have huge international ambitions. I really want us to be a global brand that is very proudly Rwandan, but it's a long way there, and we're just getting started.
Let's actually talk about those ambitions. I'd like to kind of have a better understanding of your long-term plans and growth trajectories. Where do you see Imizi, and this is the last question, before we enjoy some of this. Where do you see Imizi in the next decade, for example? And why should Rwandans cheer for your success?
So where do we see ourselves in 10 years? So when I go to a bar, and I see, these days, when I go to a bar, sometimes I'll see a Kenyan gin brand, or I will see a South African rum brand, and I will know their story because I have been, I will be able to say, oh, isn't that rum brand from KwaZulu-Natal, right? I'd like to try some, right? My vision is for us to be able to put Rwandan rum on the map in that same way, that if you are in London, if you are in DC, if you are in Toronto, if you're in Lagos, if you're in Nairobi, if you're in Shanghai, if you're in Singapore, I want people who, even if they've never been to this country, to be able to say, oh, I know that brand. Isn't that brand from Rwanda, right? I want us to be able to create that sort of impact. And in terms of why Rwandans should root for our success, I think it's because it's not my success. I do think of it as a shared effort, right? It is. I am so lucky to be building this company in a place that welcomes foreigners to build something, to come here with a dream and try and make it work. I am so lucky to be working with my Rwandan team members. I'm so lucky that we have Rwandan customers who are so passionate about the product that they act as our brand ambassadors. The number of people that have come to me and said, my friend so-and-so loves your rum, right? It takes a village to make any company a success. And so it's not going to be my success, it will be our success.
But I'm more of a brick and mortars kind of guy. So 10 years, you want to be in Washington, D.C., you want to be in Singapore. How much are you producing? Because the production there's a direct correlation between the size of production and the amount of jobs, totally. And job opportunities to the people both working with you as well as farmers.
Totally.
So what are you seeing in terms of job creation?
Without divulging the specific details of my financial model, what I will say is that the model aspires to, in 10 years, be buying from 1,000 farmers.
1,000 farmers?
Yeah.
Versus, where are you today?
3.
3 farmers. So, and how many jobs are you looking to create? Maybe you don't have to give me the exact number, but are we talking factory? Are you talking maybe 100 people in the factory, another bunch of drivers and farmers? What kind of numbers are we playing?
What I can say is, again, that the types of, here's what I'll say. I'll say that we're building this from scratch, and there is so much supportive infrastructure that goes into building into creating a brand. So we're looking at, I say, hopefully, knock on wood, we succeed and we keep on growing. We want to be able to hire distillers. We want to be able to hire tour guides. We want to be able to hire hospitality professionals, level up the food and beverage offerings here. We want to essentially create a whole ecosystem around a Rwandan brand known for its excellence in flavor and in providing a new vision of Rwandan hospitality and flavor.
Okay, so now that you've answered that question, do you want to pour some?
Totally, yeah.
Let's try it out.
Yeah, so I will say a couple of things. First of all, everyone can learn more. I make rum, and I don't consider myself an expert on tasting it because there's still so much to learn. Even if you're not drinking a lot, I think it's helpful to pour a little more so that you can nose it right? So, yeah, I would say don't be intimidated by spirits and don't feel obliged to, find the right notes. Flavor is intensely personal, and so much of what your brain connects the sensory information to how it connects that sensory information to its associations will depend on what you've tasted in the past, what memories you have. It's intensely personal. Cheers. Smell. Here's a thing that I think really works. Somebody told me, and I think it does work. If you're sniffing spirits, because they're higher proof than wine, open your mouth so that way the alcohol doesn't really burn as it goes up through your nose, right? You're then able to nose more without getting numbed by alcohol burn.
Okay, let's try that.
So on the nose, you might have gotten vanilla, fennel, and then something green, and what that green is.
I can smell herbs.
It might have been, but maybe shoot for a little more, right? Rosemary, what type of herb? Rosemary, peppermint, fennel.
It's spicy.
Spicy, okay.
So what?
Yeah, I get spice too. Let me try some right now. So the spice that I get spice too. And then it's kind of helpful when you're tasting something to try and put more words to it. So if it's spice, is it red chili? Is it green chili? Is it ginger? Is it black pepper? What type of heat are you associating? My palate, I get ginger powder, specifically dry ginger, not fresh ginger. Should I tell you how I experience the spirit? Or
the way I kind of did, and I think that's something that we need to get more educated on, is just understanding the complexities of drink. So very often because we come from beer, and then from beer to a waragi, and it's just usually really, really harsh drinks. So we're not really taught the complexities. By the way, how much does this cost?
64,900 francs.
Okay. And what is that a good price? Because within our context, right? So 64,000 is almost it's about $50.
Yeah.
That's not cheap.
No, it's not cheap. No. And so yeah, full transparency. Anyone can go to the neighborhood store and compare prices, right? We would be about double the price of Captain Morgan's, roughly, right? And I don't think that there is a premium rum priced at our price point. I believe it's a fair price for what we're doing, and I have no interest in charging more than I think is fair. We are a very, very small-scale operation. There is only so much we produce. And so, as a consequence, we have to, it's classic supply and demand.
Where can you find this?
So you can order us online on our website, www.
Do you ship all over the world?
Only in Kigali, and we can with special requests and figuring it out. It might take us some time. Ship to other parts of Rwanda, for example, you're in Gisenyi or Musanze. We can figure it out, but right, we promise delivery within Kigali within 24 hours. We also have a physical retail presence in Gishushu. We run a pop-up Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays where you can try our rum and cocktails. You can talk to our bartending team and learn more about the spirit. They're really, really fantastic, really, really know their stuff. Yeah.
Rohan, thank you so much for coming on the long form, and thank you for bringing this to us. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, Sanny. It was such a pleasure.
Shall we do this again when you get a gold?
Well, we can do this again when we get a gold. We can do this again when we launch a new product. Hopefully, if I'm able to execute, our future here is long.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Cheers.
Cheers. If you enjoyed the conversation today, share your thoughts with us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.